Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy. And in today's video, we're going to be going over my bounce back player list for fantasy football in 2021. Inside of this video, I'm going to be talking about 5 players that I believe are going to have bounce back seasons from last year. Whether that is that they had a bad last season, or that since one of these guys was a rookie, he was kind of, in my opinion, being severely overrated to what he was going to end up actually being. And this year, he can have that bounce back year, even if he technically put up pretty good stats. He just was not what most people thought he would be last season. So if you guys do end up enjoying this video, please make sure that you hit that subscribe button down below, because not only is it free, I put out content every single day to help you guys win your 2021 fantasy football league. So without further ado, let's get into it. At the number 1 overall bounce back player right here, again, these guys are in no order, but this is the first guy to be talking about here, and that's wide receiver Michael Thomas of the New Orleans Saints. Last year, this guy is unanimously everyone's wide receiver 1, basically, on everyone's rankings. Everyone loved Michael Thomas. The Slant King had a year in 2019 where he is putting up these ridiculous numbers, getting so many targets, so many receiving yards, so many receptions, so many touchdowns. This guy was on top of the world in 2019, and everyone thought that his reign of being the king of fantasy football at the wide receiver position was not going to end, and that he was going to repeat Michael Jordan 96, 97 type of year, that he was going to go back to back and be amazing yet again. But frankly, that is not what ended up happening, because Michael Thomas only ended up playing in 7 games last season, suffering a high ankle sprain in week 1 of 2020, making him miss 7 total games, as well as a hamstring strain that he suffered in week number 7. Now, Michael Thomas is not a injury prone player really at all. On his whole injury report for his whole NFL and collegiate career, the only time he ever had another injury was an ankle strain in preseason of 2016 that resulted in him missing a total of 0 games. So really, in 2020 was the only time that Michael Thomas has missed any time in his NFL career. In those 7 games, he finished as wide receiver 93 in PPR, 97.5 PPR, and wide receiver number 102 in standard, averaging 12 PPR points per game, 9.1 half PPR points per game, and 6.3 standard points per game. So even when he was out there, he wasn't producing up to the normal Michael Thomas numbers. From a points per game perspective, he was wide receiver 41 in PPR, 48.5 PPR, and wide receiver number 63 in standard. And now he's coming off the board as pick number 28.3 based upon current underdog ADP. So people are adjusting very heavily on Michael Thomas, as Michael Thomas in 2020 went as the number 1 guy at the wide receiver position. He was a first-round pick. Now he's falling into the 3rd round in a majority of leagues. So people are clearly adjusting, but are they really over-adjusting? That could definitely be a case made, because while I understand that some people may worry that, hey, Drew Brees is gone, that means Michael Thomas is going to be bad, that is honestly quite the contrary, because his stats look very similar with and without Drew Brees. So throughout Michael Thomas's career, he's played 60 games with Drew Brees versus 10 without. In the 60 games with Drew Brees, he was averaging 14.9 half PPR points per game. Without Drew Brees in those 10 games, 14.89 half PPR points per game. 18.51 PPR points per game with Drew Brees versus 18.74 without. 11.3 standard points per game with Drew Brees versus 11.04 without. 7.22 targets or receptions per game with Drew Brees versus 7.7 without. His targets 9.37 with Drew Brees versus 9.6 without. And then his touchdowns did end up going down without Drew Brees, 0.48 per game with Drew Brees versus 0.3 without Drew Brees. His receiving yards did go up though without Drew Brees, 83.78 per game versus 92.3. So it doesn't really seem like who is under center really matters at all for Michael Thomas. So even if you are the biggest Jameis Winston hater, you could still understand how there is a very easy path for Michael Thomas to be a top 10, if not top 5 wide receiver in fantasy football in 2020 due to the high amount of target share this guy commands on the Saints offense. Besides Alvin Kamara, they don't really have a locked and loaded wide receiver number 2 on this roster, and Alvin Kamara is obviously a running back. So I think that Michael Thomas actually could be seeing an even more absurd amount of targets in 2021. Last season in 2020, he had 55 targets, which is about 7.9 per game, for 5.7 receptions per game, which is 40 receptions on the season. He had 438 receiving yards and 0 total touchdowns. So obviously he was missing time last last year due to those injuries, but in reality, I think it was due to a fight with the organization. It seemed like he was missing games that he didn't need to. He was showing up to practice, leaving practice, all types of crazy shit was happening last year. Michael Thomas is certainly, in my opinion, an NFL diva. This guy is fucking crazy, tweeting out all types of ridiculous shit at other players, but at the end of the day, throw that all out the window, because what a guy tweets, what a guy does on Instagram does not fucking matter for fantasy football. You don't get a point per tweet fired off. You don't get any of that. It's about the real numbers of the game, and Michael Thomas is one of the better wide receivers in the NFL, so it should be relatively easy to see a bounce back for him in 2021, easily, in my opinion, finishing as a top 10 wideout. Next up, we have running back Ezekiel Elliott. Now, in my opinion, Michael Thomas and Ezekiel Elliott were the two most obvious players on this list. Some of the other ones might be a little bit more of not even really a stretch, but it's just not the guys that would come to the top of your head, because when you think of bounce back, you're probably thinking Ezekiel Elliott and Michael Thomas. Ezekiel Elliott still being drafted inside of the top 10, underdog ADP 7.5. Now, Ezekiel Elliott last year obviously dealt with a whole bunch of bullshit because Dakota Prescott ended up getting hurt, and to me, that is what really put the nail in the coffin on Ezekiel Elliott's season. But even with having a kind of shit season, he still finished pretty well at the end of the year. In 15 games, Ezekiel Elliott finished as the running back number 9 in PPR, 11.5 PPR, and 11 in standard, averaging 14.9 PPR points per game, 13.2 half PPR points per game, and 11.4 standard points per game, meaning from a points per game perspective, Ezekiel Elliott was running back 16 in PPR, 16.5 PPR, as well as 18 in standard. So Ezekiel Elliott is very much a good fucking running back. That's obvious. The only worry is that maybe this Cowboys offensive line isn't the same, and I would agree with that. The Cowboys offensive line is not the one of the past where you're thinking like 4 or 5 years ago where they just hand the ball off and the fucking offensive line builds a wall and these guys just run through it easily like it's nothing. That's not really what it is anymore, but again, I think that the fact that Dak got injured really injured this offense. It completely studded the offense. They had Gucci Danucci playing, Andy Dalton, all these other scrubs were playing football instead of Dak Prescott because of that injury, and I think with Dak coming back, Ezekiel Elliott should make a very strong case for potentially being the running back 1 in 2021. Back in the past, a throwback to the past, a lot of the knocks, a lot of the narratives on Ezekiel Elliott used to be that he wasn't very good at catching the ball, but a couple of years ago, he completely took that narrative and slam dunked that shit like Shaquille O'Neal, because that is not true anymore. This guy had 73 targets last year, 4th highest at the running back position for 52 receptions, 8th highest at running back for 338 receiving yards. He also had 244 carries, 5th highest at running back for 979 receiving yards, 10th highest at running back, and 8 total tugs, 19th highest at the running back position. But again, this is with this offense basically being limp dick after Dak Prescott ended up getting hurt. They simply could not move the ball as effectively, and the fact that the defense was so bad certainly hurt even more because Ezekiel Elliott's a running back. In order to run the ball more, you need to be in a close game or in a game where your ass is not getting blown out like your name was Mia Malkova. So I do believe that the defense should be stronger, and that shouldn't even be a hot take because the defense last year was dog shit. It was soft. It couldn't do anything. It literally could not stop anything. But this year, I think it should be much better, which should be obvious because you just simply can't be that bad again. It was so bad last year to watch. They were in that one game up against the Atlanta Falcons where the Falcons were up like 40 points and the Dallas Cowboys ended up winning the game. There was like 80 total points scored in that game just because of how bad Dallas's defense is. They were in many of those games last season. Dak was having to crawl back into these games. That's why the guy had so many yards last season. So if the defense just improves slightly, we should see more rushing opportunity for Ezekiel Elliott, and with Dak Prescott being hopefully healthy, that also opens up a lot of opportunity for feed the Zeke. Next up, we got the first quarterback and the only quarterback on this list, Carson Wentz, quarterback now of the Indianapolis Colts. If you guys do end up enjoying this video thus far, we're at about the halfway mark. Please make sure that you hit that subscribe button down below. So last year, Carson Wentz was a complete and utter dumpster fire. And so were the Eagles. Carson Wentz is getting thrown into the game. He's exiting the game. They bring in Jalen Hurts. They take out Jalen Hurts. Carson Wentz literally looked like he had zero confidence at all. He didn't have an ounce of confidence in his body. He was going out there, and it seemed like he knew that this team was such a shit show that he knew he could not do anything. His offensive line was terrible. The wide receivers on that team completely fucking sucked. It was like Carson Wentz versus the world, and Carson Wentz was on the team of the world because he just showed no confidence. He showed no poise back there. He was not the Carson Wentz of a couple of years ago where there's people shouting MVP at him before he ends up getting hurt. Right now, Carson Wentz is coming off the board at pick 157.3, so he's basically undrafted. He is going to be a guy that I don't necessarily even love to target, but if he's my quarterback too, I'm pretty comfortable taking that shot on Carson Wentz, considering I feel like last year was such a momentous disaster that a scenery change in Indianapolis can open the door to a much more successful season in 2021. Last year in 12 games, he finished as the quarterback 22 in 4-point per passing touchdown leagues and quarterback 22 in 6-point per passing touchdown leagues. Now, last year, a lot of the narrative on Carson Wentz was starting to go sour early on, as not as many people were talking about Carson Wentz being a top 10 quarterback in 2020, like had been the talk in 2019, 2018, 2017. Basically, the whole time this guy has been a starter in the NFL, people have tried to elevate him to be a top 10 quarterback in fantasy football. Which obviously he was at a point in his career when those people were shouting for him to be the MVP, because he frankly was out of this world, but he has not really returned to that form. Last year, averaging 16.5 4-point per passing touchdown points per game and 19.2 6-point per passing touchdown points per game. From a points per game perspective, he was quarterback 22 in 4-point passing touchdown and quarterback 22 in 6-point per passing touchdown league. So he definitely just didn't have all that great of a season. Now, the expectations weren't as high last year, but people definitely didn't think that this guy was going to go out there and completely stink it up. A lot of people were drafting him to be their quarterback one. I think based upon ADP last year, he was like a top 14 quarterback off the board. That is no longer. He is more closer to like 18 or 20 than he is to top 12. So I think that with the expectations off of Carson Wentz for fantasy football, now you can happily invest in him because you're not having to pay that high price total for Carson Wentz. His ADP is actually going even further down. It's not increasing. He's not going higher in the draft. He's actually going further back over the last week, minus 3.61 spots in the last couple of weeks. So I want to talk about Carson Wentz, just his everything last year. His supporting cast efficiency based upon playerprofiler.com was negative 7.65. Negative supporting cast efficiency, 28th highest at the quarterback position. His offense supporting cast efficiency completely sucked because all the wide receivers were dropping like flies and the offensive line was not playing very well. Regardless, he threw the ball 438 times. He threw a grand total of, drumroll please, 16 touchdowns, not very good, through 30 interceptable passes, not interceptions, second highest at the quarterback position, 42 danger plays, fourth highest at quarterback. So he was kind of playing a little dicey last season, but again, I'm just going to throw that away, completely throw that away, and hope that Frank Reich can bring Carson Wentz back to the former glory that he had him with early on in his career in Philadelphia. I think that the weapons there are clearly so much better. Michael Pittman, even if I don't like T.Y. Hilton, he's definitely a step up. Zach Pascal, they also maybe are trading for Zach Ertz. They have a great running back and a pretty solid offensive line. Basically everything they didn't have in Philadelphia for Carson Wentz last year, as well as having a very good NFL head coach. So I think at the end of the day, Carson Wentz is probably just going to be staying this far back because he has burned people for years now. For years, people will talk Wentz up, and he's not that guy, pal. You're not that guy. But maybe this year in Indianapolis, with a change of scenery, with a boost of confidence, he is going to be much better. Next up here, we got a guy that I think will bounce back strictly because last year, everyone had such high expectations of this guy, higher than Snoop Dogg probably is right now. Underdog ADP 21.3, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Now, I don't even think I like Clyde Edwards-Helaire that much at underdog ADP pick 21.3, but to me, he was so overhyped last year. People are drafting him inside of the top 8 picks because he's a running back on the Chiefs team, which makes sense in theory. But in reality, you're drafting a 5'7" guy, okay? Guy's not going to score very many touchdowns, but I think that he was very sneaky last year. His stats were very, very sneaky. He had 803 rushing yards. He had 55 targets for 36 receptions, 297 receiving yards, and 5 total touchdowns. A very sneaky year for Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who finishes running back 22 in PPR, 22.5 PPR, as well as in standard, averaging 13.5 PPR points per game, 12.2 half PPR points per game, and 10.8 standard points per game. From a points per game perspective, he was running back 23 in PPR, 24.5 PPR, tied with Melvin Gordon, and running back number 26 in standard. So Clyde Edwards-Helaire was obviously decent last year, but where you drafted him, he completely burned the bridge in your brain for wanting to draft Clyde Edwards-Helaire again. At least in my opinion, that is why he has moved further back. Now, the question is, at the price of 21.3, am I wanting to draft him there? No. But that doesn't mean he's not going to bounce back big time and doesn't have very big potential, as this Kansas City Chiefs offense should obviously be really fucking good again, because Andy Reid, the Kool-Aid man, oh yeah, is still going to be a very good head coach, and this team is still going to be able to march all up and down the field with such ease. So I think Clyde Edwards-Helaire is a pretty easy pick for a bounce back candidate, but it really depends on if you consider it to be a bounce back or not, because he didn't even play shit. It was just the fact that his ADP was so high last year compared to where he finished. Let me know down below your guys' thoughts about Clyde Edwards-Helaire, because to be honest with you, I don't love him, but I also don't feel like I'm burning my fucking pick with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, kind of like how I felt last year with him. Final player to discuss here is another guy that I don't necessarily love, but he's obviously going to be bouncing back. That is wide receiver formerly of the Detroit Lions, now of the New York Football Giants, Kenny Bones. Kenny G-Spot, Kenny Golladay, underdog ADP 58.9. Now, last year, I was standing here yelling directly into my microphone that Kenny Golladay was going to be a league winner, that Kenny Golladay was going to put the team on your back, Darren Sharper, hold my dick type of deal. I was talking about this guy as he may be one of the best wide receivers to ever grace God Green Earth, maybe that's the saying? God's green earth, something like that, like fucking the fantasy football gridiron. He's like one of the best, you know? I'm sucking this guy off, and he completely couldn't, he was terrible because he got hurt, and when he was on the field, frankly, he wasn't looking all that good. In 5 games, he finished as wide receiver 102 in PPR, 102.5 PPR, and wide receiver number 99 in standard. From a points per game perspective, he was wide receiver number 35 in PPR, tied with CD Lamb, and wide receiver number 31.5 PPR and 24 in standard, averaging 13.2 PPR points per game, 11.2 half PPR points per game, and 9.2 standard points per game. So Kenny Golladay was pretty solid. Not psych, because he wasn't very solid, but you can see how this can easily change, because Kenny Golladay is a big framed wide receiver, 6'2", 218 pounds, who has put up big seasons previously in the NFL. Just looking back at 2019, for example. In 2019, he had a grand total of 116 targets. He had 1,190 receiving yards, 65 receptions, and 11 total touchdowns, number 1 touchdowns in the NFL. So you can see how he could have a bad or a good year, but things definitely went sour last year. 32 targets, he had 20 receptions, 338 receiving yards, and 2 total touchdowns, and he was out due to a hip injury from week 8 on, missing 9 games. The other games he missed were from a hamstring strain week 1, missing 2 games after that. So Golladay was just an injury-riddled mess last year, and if I'm being honest with you, I think he was healthy and just didn't want to play. I think he knew he was done in Detroit, didn't want to get hurt again, and just wanted to hop on the train out of there, regardless of where he was going, and obviously he ended up in New York. Now, while I do have qualms with Danny Dimes, with this New York Football Giants passing offense, I do still think that Kenny Golladay is a relatively safe wide receiver who should easily finish as a top 24 guy as a wide receiver too, but the question is, will Daniel Jones limit his potential? And to me, I think so. He should still easily bounce back, just like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, but I'm not too sure I necessarily love the player in 2021 like I did in 2020, because again, I was a big Kenny Golladay guy last year. You can basically watch any video on my channel. I was drafting Kenny Golladay in the 3rd round every single time. Now, obviously, going much later at underdog ADP 58.9. And if you guys did end up enjoying this video, thank you so much. I would really appreciate if you hit that subscribe button down below if you are new. If you're not new, make sure to just hit that like button. It helps me out a ton. I love you guys all. Make sure you stay safe and happy fucking Friday, baby. It's almost the weekend. I love you guys all. Have a great rest of your guys' day. Stay safe. Goodbye.